So this conversation that we're going to get started with right now is called Representation Done Right. And so we'll be talking with some various leaders and how they've navigated board diversity and building boards and leadership in their own organizations. We are joined by Angela Ankoma from the United Way of Rhode Island. We also have Meredith Curren of Trouble, Mike Ritz, who we just heard from, of Leadership Rhode Island, and Sonya Sepahban of our office. So thank you all for joining us today. I believe you're all here, and I'll pass it over to Angela.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. Excited to join you and talk with the panelists that we have here today. As Avi said, I am at United Way of Rhode Island. I oversee the Community Investments Department. I always say that I have a fancy title, but I spend the money that's raised and looking at ways to invest it into community so we can have a greater impact in Rhode Island. Prior to joining the United Way, I was at the Rhode Island Department of Health for about 10 years, left as a co-director of the Health Equity Institute. And so we're going to start our panel by having the panelists introduce themselves and share a little bit about their board experience, either working on a board or working with a board. So let's start first with Meredith Curren. Meredith, I don't see your mic cubes here.
I think
there you go.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you for having me. This is a great topic and one that's very close to my heart. I've had many chapters in my career, starting with working in banking, going back to business school, realizing as an English major I needed to get a finance degree, which I did, and then coming back to Rhode Island to work in a family business, which was a precious metals refinery. So after about 17 years of that, I said, if I don't make a leap, I will be here forever. But importantly, while I was doing that job, I thought to myself, I need to get more engaged in the community. And so I asked some friends, I'd love to get on a not-for-profit board. And that was my first foray. It was the Hospice Care Board, which is now Hope Hospice. And I had the great benefit of being on a very well-run board with a great board chair. And I also pretty quickly realized that all the stuff that I was interested in doing to make a difference happens on the finance committee, which I was not on at the beginning. So that learning led me to then join the Providence Chamber Board and the YMCA board and become treasurer of the Greater Providence YMCA board. And the reason I did that was, again, because I knew that that was a lot of where the power structure was on the board. And again, I had the benefit of great board chairs and really well-run boards. Once I took the leap from Pease and Curren, I started a firm called Edgewood Holdings, which still exists today. And that was a firm to invest in startups. That was an area I really wanted to learn more about. So I joined several startup organizations to learn more. Along the way, I had the good fortune to meet a woman who had a private equity firm named Gina Raimondo. Over time, we became friendly, and I ended up then my next chapter working for her when she became governor. So for the last 6 years, I've been at the State House as director of boards and commissions. So that's all the appointments to the hundreds of state boards, as well as positions like the adjutant general, judges, the state poet laureate. So it's been a super interesting job. I've also along the way, because of the connections that I made through the chamber and through some serendipity for sure, I was able to get on some for-profit boards, including Ocean State Tax Exempt Fund, a little company that makes, it's an intellectual property company called Research, Engineering, and Manufacturing, which does joining technologies, and then also Blue Cross Blue Shield, which at the time was not a paying board, but really interesting board to be on because healthcare, my husband said, you can't join that board. They habitually deny claims to women and children. And I said, would you rather have me on the inside where I can make change, or on the outside? And so that was an adventure. It needed a new CEO. We needed a lot of change there. So being on boards that require a lot of change is very interesting to me. I also feel for not-for-profit boards, for me anyway, in about 7 years, you've done what you can do, and it's time to maybe step off and do something else. So I am now working part-time for the governor for a number of personal reasons, and that's what led me to start this company called Trouble, which is, I started it with my friend and colleague, Barry Harlem, who's a marketing guru. And the idea is to sell cool merchandise, honor troublemakers for good, women who are changing the world, and along the way, earn enough to give back to organizations that support equity for women and girls. So we launched on August 18th, which is of course the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. And you know, we're fledgling, we're fulfilling from Barry's basement, but we've got a great team, and it's a real exciting project that's very close to my heart. So I will stop there, and I can talk about more boards that I've been on if you would like, but I think I've probably said enough for now.
Thank you, Meredith. Very, very diverse experience, and really enjoyed listening to your trajectory and how you went from volunteering on various boards, from profit to nonprofit health, and also starting amazing startups as well too. Next, I'd love to hear from Sonya. Sonya, share a little bit more about yourself and your board experience, either working on a board or working with one.
Sure. It's good to be here with all of you. I'm Sonya Sepahban, joining you from the West Coast today here in Los Angeles. I'm currently the CEO of our office, where we have invented really diversity and inclusion as a service. This is a turnkey solution which provides an organization basically with everything you need to build an inclusive workplace on an affordable monthly subscription. So it includes a dedicated D&I manager, the proven culture transformation process that we have, and the software platform that we've built. So it's everything you need. But I started my career as a NASA engineer and as an astronaut wannabe. I ended up spending the majority of my career in aerospace and defense, building spacecraft. Like the one you see in the movie Gravity. If you've seen it, you know, it's the pod, the escape pod that Sandra Bullock jumps into to come back home from when the space station has trouble. In the latter part of my career, I spent almost 7 years on a latter part of my corporate career. I spent almost 7 years in the combat vehicle side of things in the defense industry. This is actually where I got most of my exposure and inspiration for what I do now in diversity and inclusion space. I've been on boards for the last, seems like forever, last 20 plus years, starting with nonprofit boards, and then later on boards of tech startups, an investment fund, and ultimately now on the board of a publicly traded companies. My initial board exposure, because I know you wanted to know how do you get on your first board, was because I was passionate about disadvantaged youth. And so I volunteered to take the corporate board seat that we had due to our contributions on the board of a nonprofit. Then, you know, once I got on that first one, I got a reputation for it, and other nonprofit board opportunities followed. It was actually at for one of these nonprofits, I was at a luncheon with one of them, and I was sitting next to the legal counsel for the public company that ultimately asked me to join their board. So it's really been just happening sort of, as Meredith said it a little bit, by just being in different places and really initially following my own passion and putting my hand up. I guess I've been a troublemaker, Meredith, for most of my career. And so I volunteered, and I know we were going to talk about this a lot more, but that's a little bit about my journey thus far.
Thank you, Sonya. Next, I have the honor of introducing Mike Ritz. Speaking of boards, I'm actually on the board of governors of, I'm forgetting where I'm representing right now. I'm representing United Way, but I'm also on the board of governors at Leadership Rhode Island. And I've been on that board, I would say, has it been 5 years, Mike? Yeah. And so it's been an incredible honor and a journey to be able to meet different people on that board and to be able to be part of an organization that I am incredibly proud of and honored to be a graduate of the best class ever, which is a Kappa 2s. And so, Mike, would you like to introduce yourself and talk a little bit more about your your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you're on our board, Angie. I don't know about the best class ever, but it was pretty good, that 2014 class. So I'm Mike Ritz. I'm the Executive Director of Leadership Rhode Island. I'm a graduate in 2007. Just a little context on our board. We only have 2 seats that allow you not to be a graduate of our program and sit on the board. So that's a little bit different than some other nonprofit boards. We do have 1 seat that goes to anyone who hasn't gone through the programming. Then we have 1 seat for a college leadership Rhode Island graduate. I suspect that's going to change here probably in coming as we start to do more national level connectivity, but that's how it's been. So that makes for an interesting board for sure. There's good and bad about that, I'd say. I wanted to talk a little bit about why I joined a board. And you know, I always like to do these talks because when the topic comes up, it's not always the front of my mind. And so I spent some time sort of reflecting about, well, what have I done? And looking back, those that know me know I'm always sort of looking into the future. I'm just naturally inclined to do that. And I seldom look backwards to say, what have I been doing? And so I wanted to do that because I thought it might be helpful. I've both been invited to serve on boards and also have sought after boards that interested me. So both have happened. And some have required, you know, more official like resumes or at least wanted bios. All of them have required interviews. And some of them were, you know, involved a really extensive vetting process, and others were more like, hey, we need you and we already know who you are, so we do this thing. Department of Defense was an extraordinary vetting process, as you might imagine, multiple levels of scrutinization, almost like trying to get a job at the Pentagon or something, because we literally were in the Pentagon. So there was a lot of scrutinizing there versus, you know, more local grassroots boards tend to be, we already know you. Do you want to do this? What can you do? When I think about whether I'm a good fit for a board, I consider the board leadership at present, particularly those in the executive committee roles and the board chair, also the executive director or CEO, depending on what their titles are. I think about whether I'm passionate about that mission. I know me well enough to know that if I'm not, it probably won't grab me and I'll probably fall off. I look at will I learn and grow while I also contribute. You know, I have enlightened self-interest. I do want to get something out of this. I'm not just all give. So will I learn and will I grow? Does it have the kind of board culture that's right for me at the moment? You know, and that depends on my stage of life, or it has over the years, whether, you know, I'm interested in a more strategic sort of culture, or I want to really get my hands dirty. Where am I in my own leadership life, and particularly with that mission? And does this tap into my motivations? So I look at volunteerism by someone who taught me this probably almost 20 years ago now, that there are really 3 types of people that volunteer, and it's helpful to identify them so you'll know their motives. And they may change, and there's a blend certainly, but it was typified as there are those that have a specialty and they'll practice that specialty wherever they go. They just love it. Like, I like to build websites and I'll build it for, you know, saving animals, and I'll build it for the banking industry. I don't care. I just love doing this. And they have that specialty and that drives them. The others are barterers. They're giving because they're getting something back, and they're really a more direct transactional type of thing. So, you know, I'm going to invest and put my time into this because it gives me something in return, and sometimes that's tangible. And then there are what I would call lovers that just frankly love the mission, and they'll take out the trash, or they'll do the strategic plan, or they'll do anything to push that mission forward. And I sort of look at those and think about, what are my motivations? Am I being a lover, a barterer, or a specialist right now? And that helps me try to figure it out. And then I ask myself, will I make the time I need to be successful? Is this going to be a priority that I'll make the time? I never have the time, really. So will I make it? Will I not be that bad board member that doesn't show up, that doesn't do my homework? Or will I really make this a priority or not? I think that's important. And what will I accept as success when my term or terms end? I like to think about that in advance. What will make me feel successful in this? And then on the flip side, how will they view me as successful in that role as a board member? And I sort of go down that list, and because of my role at Leadership Rhode Island, I'm often approached about open positions, and they're looking for board members, or people want to be on a boards, and I take them through that process to try to figure that out, and then a little bit more. So since 2006, I served on my first board, which was the Center for Living and Working in Worcester, Massachusetts. I had been their development director, and I told them I'd worked there for 2 years. So at 2 years, I gave them my resignation, and I gave them my application to serve on the board because I still believed in the mission, and I wanted to make that transition as smooth as it could to keep them going. That was the first board I served on. And then I've served over the years, I sort of went down the list. Some of them I had forgotten. I served on Leadership Rhode Island board. So in one, I left the job and went on the board, and one I was on the board and then took a job. So I did the reverse. I served on the Employer Support of the Garden Reserve as the state chairman, and then formed the first national board since 1972, and served as the vice chairman nationally for that DoD organization. And being a board on DoD is a really different kind of experience. I chaired the Avenue Concept, which many of you know is a public arts association. I was their first board chair. Rhode Island Historical Society. I'm currently the national chairman for Forge, which is around veteran suicide prevention. I'm on the nominating committee for the Girl Scouts. I mean, I don't know. What is this? I have learned so much, I'm not kidding you, from being on the nominating committee of the Girl Scouts in the last 6 months than I've learned on a lot of boards the whole term. They have got it together, I'm telling you right now. So if you're interested in the Girl Scouts, let me know. I served on the Veterans Memorial Auditorium Board because I was interested in their multicultural events. And I'm a startup to fund science research at a time when our government was defunding everything, which was called Making Progress. So I'm sort of all over the place. But asking myself those questions and making sure that I'm passionate toward that mission. If you're not passionate about it, don't do it. Don't waste all our time, please. I'm an executive director. I know what that's like.
Thank you, Mike. I'm passionate about LRI, and I am a lover, but I haven't taken out the trash yet. So, so I'm not sure if I fit neatly into that category. So next we want to talk a little bit more about diversity and leadership, and really looking at what do you look for, and Mike, you talked a little bit about it. What do you look for when you volunteer in the corporate roles, and what do you offer? Meredith, you want to take that question?
Sure. So like Mike, I look for opportunities to grow. I certainly have to be interested in it, but I think for the corporate boards, I don't necessarily have to be passionate about screw technology, but what I am passionate about is the owner of the company is a woman. There were no other women on that board. They have an international presence. They have offices in several different countries. It was a real opportunity for me to learn a lot, and it's somewhat manufacturing based. So there's a variety of things I think about. I have served on boards that are really well run, and I've also served on boards that are not well run at all. And usually that's because I feel passionate about it, because it's my local PTA or my local library, or something that's community based that I feel excited about, and that I can contribute to, because I do bring a lot of board experience, and it's fun to go into a board where they don't have good bylaws and they've never applied for a grant and they need a new roof, and They don't have two signatures on their little endowment, so you don't have, safety, precautions there, and to go in and be able to help with that. So that's been a motivator for me as well. I would say, certainly being on the Wheeler School board and chairing that board was a labor of love, because I had 2 of my 3 kids went there. The Bank RI board has been really interesting because it was sold to Brookline. So I got to, first of all, I got to chair the audit committee. I got to be on the executive committee. And then I got to see it go through a merger with Brookline Bank and stay on the Bank RI board, which I am now vice chair of. So I've stayed on a long time there, because 1, it's a learning experience. 2, the CEO was a woman, and when it merged, the CEO is a man, and little by little, they skinnied down the board until I was the only woman. And I said, I'm not going off this board if I'm the only woman on the board. So, and I'm happy to say they've added 1 more, but that happens a lot. That things sort of revert back to the norm, and adding women and diverse board members it no longer becomes a priority. So it's an opportunity to push that agenda. So I've stayed on boards longer than I might for that reason as well.
Thank you, Meredith. You mentioned something which I'll probably come back to later about how do we push an agenda on a board, but I'll come back to that. Sonya, do you want to talk a little bit about what you look for when you're volunteering on corporate or volunteer boards, and what roles do you have to offer to others? You're on mute, Sonya.
Sorry, that happens to all of us. Sure, I think that Mike and Meredith have covered it really well. I'll just add this, it's a bit of a misconception. Boards, even if they are paid, my experience is, they never pay enough for how much time, you have to put in. And really the responsibility, especially bigger public boards, certainly the SEC requirements are getting more and more scarier as you go. And so you have to decide. I really liked what Mike said about deciding whether you're a lover, barter, or a specialist. I guess I'm passionate about innovation because I think it's the engine of economics and prosperity, and also of personal purpose in life. Things that require some kind of innovation often are, problems or missions that you can aspire to. So I certainly, look in board roles especially, but in any leadership role, first and foremost, I look for an opportunity to contribute, as was already said. For me, that means looking for, if they need innovation, if they're going to do something around innovation. And I think it's so important to make that point when you're looking for board roles is, what is your value add? What's your value proposition as a person? Oftentimes people, and I'll just go to the point of when I look for people on, like currently in my company, or for boards where I've been involved with the nomination process. I always look for people who know exactly what their value proposition is. All of us, by the time we are board candidates, have many, many abilities and exposures and backgrounds, And frankly, the thing that's really important is, what is the one thing that, again, like Mike said, depending on where you are in your journey, in your career, the one thing that A, you know really well, and B, you really are motivated to contribute. Because at the end of the day, when you get off a board, I ask myself that at the beginning, before going into the board, is in 5 years, 7 years, whenever I get off the board, what has Sonya done? Not just I sat on the board, but what specific contribution did I make? I think that's really super important. So I really look for that, and I usually talk to people about that. What are you going to bring that not only we really need, so it really requires an understanding of what that board needs. So you got to do some homework and kind of see where they are and what they need. But that also makes you happy that when you are satisfied, especially for voluntary boards, when by the time you get off, you can say that you really did this, and it's a contribution, something you also learned from. The other thing I just want to make a quick point about, and maybe we'll talk about it later too, is, oftentimes the chemistry is very important. obviously, you know, in any leadership team. But again, especially on boards, because you only see each other, you don't see each other all the time. I mean, even on Zoom or nowadays, you know, virtually. And you tend, you know, it's just much less frequent, the interactions. There's a lot of back channel stuff that happens. I always say most of the board work happens outside the boardroom, if you know how to do it. But, you know, at the end of the day, I think that is important. However, I think that, you know, you have to, when you offer roles to others, you have to really think of, you know, what does that fit really mean? I try to catch myself at my unconscious bias and be as objective about it as I can, because a lot of times, you know, the person who is the most natural, oh, great fit, you know, this person would fit right in, would have no problem, is a lot like ourselves. That's just the natural human unconscious bias. And so somebody who may not be exactly as comfortable at the beginning may be really a better choice, because they can come in and expand. So I always look for the board makeup, the current makeup, and what are we missing? You know, if it's somebody who has cybersecurity background or somebody who's lived in a different part of the world, you know, it's all just depends, of course, on where the organization is at and what it needs. But I think doing an inventory, I've always found it very helpful and important on nominating committees to look at, you know, to have an inventory, you know, have a matrix, as they call it, and then kind of put the current board members in there and then see where there are the holes. And you'll be surprised, it seems like a simple thing to do, but I've seen major boards not necessarily do it. And when it, you know, they have the matrix and everything, but when it comes time to get somebody, still even now, it's getting less and less frequent, but they say, oh, who do we know? You know, and oh, this is a good person. But it's like, hey, you remember that big gaping hole we had in our matrix? How about taking a look at that? You know, so you got to be the voice in the room who's willing to actually say that.
Thank you very much for that, Sonya. And oftentimes, you know, to add a little bit more is that oftentimes when you're looking at boards, some of the same people get called into the room as well too. And I think particular populations, particularly communities of color, you have the issue of the same people being tapped over and over again. And I know that, Meredith, that's something that you've been working on as well too in your role for the Governor Raimondo, her administration, and looking at how to fill the multiple boards and commissions that it's under your leadership. Talk a little bit more about your approach in finding people for the boards and commissions. How do you identify people?
Sure. It was a real privilege to do that work. And I was lucky because when I called from the governor's office, people would usually take my call. But what I started out doing was saying, oh my God, you know, we just kind of did a survey and we looked at all the boards and they were 80+% white male. And so we said, this is a real opportunity to add talent and add diversity. And so what I did was I went and met with leaders from all kinds of different groups, whether it was Jim Vincent at the NAACP or the diversity officers at all the universities, at all the large companies. And from that, I was able to get an amazing list. People would say, well, what board positions do you want to fill? And I'd say, that's not my approach. My approach is send me the talent so I have this pool of talent and I will plug them in as the positions come up, because of course it's a rotating terms and it's very complicated. Nothing was digital. We had to digitize everything. It was all like Word documents when we got there. And of course, because it's government, the legislature has a lot of strictures on the criteria. It might be geographic. It could be, you know, you've got to have 2 of these and 2 of those. So there are a lot of strictures, but nonetheless, once I identified a deep pool of talent, which there is so much in this state, and of course they had to be state residents and certainly sometimes had to live in certain communities. But what I found is that it's a total myth when people say there are no women X or there are no African American Y. That's a myth. It's a myth. They may not know those people, but those people not only exist, but they are there's deep talent in those communities, this deep, deep talent. So it was thrilling to be able to do the work. The other thing I learned is that when you're diversifying a board that forever has been white male, you can't just put one woman or one person of color on. You do it in, I tried to do it in 2 or preferably 3. So for the contractors licensing and discipline, which is a hugely important board for that field, because it regulates who can work where, what, and how in you know, from architects to home inspectors to construction contractors. And we put 3 women on at once for that board. Same with RIPTA. There wasn't a lot of diversity, so we put 3 people of color on at once, all of whom are incredible, just incredible. So that's been really fun. The other thing that really struck me as I was doing appointments was that 90% of the time when I called a white male, because we did appoint some white males to be on a board, they would say, sure, yeah, sure, I'll do that. They wouldn't ask any questions, or whereas 90% of the time when I called an incredibly qualified woman, she'd say, oh, I don't know if I'm qualified enough. When does it meet? Send me all the information. I want to be able to make all the meetings. So that's just a cautionary tale of women do not give themselves enough credit for their talent. And I'm telling you, these women that I was calling were always unbelievably accomplished and talented. So that's the women are more focused on being able to do the work at a very, very high level. And the men are more focused on, yeah, that sounds good. I'll be on that board. I can probably make 80% of the meetings, but that's okay. So that was a really striking phenomenon that was consistent in the 5 years that I did that work.
Thank you for that, Meredith. I think it's, I really appreciate you mentioning the point where you always brought multiple people on the board. There's been tremendous experience of people.
We're losing you there, Angie. Your screen froze.
Looks like we lost Angie.
Angie, try shutting off your screen and see if you can get the bandwidth for verbal. It might work.
It happens.
Oops, can you hear me?
We can, yeah.
You're back.
Okay. I'm getting it's thinking about it so far.
If you turn off your video, it might give a little more juice and your audio might be more consistent.
Okay,
Yeah.
Let's see. There's some people doing work at work. So hold on a second. How am I?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Perfect. So back to my question, Meredith, what would you say you're most proud of in your work so far in the boards and commissions?
So we kept track. So the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the state didn't have the budget to keep track of this. And it is complicated because we file them with the Secretary of State's office. So there was no mechanism for that. So we kept track of the people that we appointed. And our goal was to appoint the percentages of the community that were in the last census. So we were able to do that. And we knew that with this next census, those percentages would change, but we had to have some data point to use. And so we appointed always 50% female, and it was, I think, 17% people of color. I think it should be closer to 23, so we were always pushing that. So I'm very proud of that. Now, that changed the face of the boards, but of course it takes a lot of time to go from 80%, one group of people to what those numbers should be. But I said, in our tenure, while we're here for these, for me, it was 5 years at that job, we're going to make sure that we follow those guidelines, and we were able to.
That's great.
And up the talent, let me tell you, really, really exciting.
I'm sure. Sonya, you want to talk a little bit more about, you talked about investing in startups and what you were looking for in terms of leadership diversity.
Yes, I'd be happy to. I did investing in startups quite a bit, both as an angel investor and also on the investment committee of a fund, an angel fund, the largest one actually in Michigan, the Michigan Angel Fund, for a number of years before, I don't know what happened, and I decided to become a startup entrepreneur myself. But when I was investing, I think, we all know the team is always very important in any setting. But with startups, it's really disproportionately important. I want to just make that point first, because there's so little else to go by in a startup. Also, while diversity is always important, it is also even more important, more critical for startups because of the level of innovation and creativity that the startup environment demands. So, to answer your questions with this kind of backdrop of how critical it is, I really looked for two things in startup teams. Is the startup leadership representative of the market they're trying to serve? So they can connect with and understand the pain point that they're trying to solve for. You'd be surprised, but there is all kinds of startups where not only the leadership isn't representative of who the customers would be, but they have no appreciation for the fact that they at least need to add someone. I have nothing against white males. In fact, I've worked really great with white males. I was always belonged to the boys club, before I got into diversity and inclusion. I really didn't have that much focus on it for myself, even though I was in a highly male-dominated, and I myself, from a minority background as well as woman, it was really not a big thing to me. And at the end of the day, you always have to work with the majority. So I have no problem with a couple of white dudes, as we say in the startup world, starting a product that's for people of color, women. That's fine if they decide to do that. But they need to add someone to that leadership team. They need to at least have an appreciation that that's important. So the first thing is just having that diversity and having that appreciation. Then the second thing was, so given that diversity, how well does the leadership team work together, able to surface and discuss contrary views and arrive at decisions? This really goes to the heart of why it's so important to look beyond diversity to inclusion, which reflects the extent to which those diverse voices can be heard. I've had this experience myself, even on a public company board. I was the very first woman on a public company board ever. Of course, I've been the first one, on many things, as I'm sure the rest of the women here have been, or if you're any underrepresented group, this is a common experience. It's not just mine. And you do your best, but something really magical happens. I remember when our chair decided to add, we're adding some board members, decided on the second one was going to be another woman. He said to me jokingly, he said, well, we did okay with you, so we decided we could have another one like you, another woman. And, it's something magical happened, even though you can probably tell I'm not shy and I speak my mind. I've been known to be, if anything, somewhat outspoken, but in a way that's collaborative, obviously, and respectful. But, even for me, it is hard when you're one of 9 people in a boardroom to persist too long on too many things. So you have to kind of really pick your battles really carefully, right? But when there's a second person that maybe shares some of that viewpoint, all of a sudden it kind of changes, the dynamic changes. And when there is 3, it's even more. I think the 30% rule really goes. So when you look at it and people have this tokenism, let's have one of this. It's kind of what Meredith was saying, you're the only woman. It's just the dynamics of it, and you can feel it, that you can't push too hard on things. But if there's 2 or 3 voices, and by the way, I want to make the point also that I've had white males be more of an ally and be more like-minded to me than necessarily another woman. So I do appreciate the diversities that we can see, and I think they're very important, and certainly a lot of our work is around that. But I also have appreciation for just diversity of thought and background. Now, if somebody says, oh, we're all white males, but we have really different perspectives. I don't accept that, because I just think you just haven't had the experiences. But at times, if you have some diversity, it's not limited, I want to say, to just people that look diverse. You can also look for allies. And it's super important, especially on a board, to look for allyship, especially in a board, again, because a lot of things happen, in the back channels and outside the boardroom, to develop those relationships with kind of the majority, if you will, population, and people can have that allyship. But it doesn't replace having really the full experience of the diversity, people that really look and have had different experiences in life and in their journey. And again, I think the most important thing is, okay, so you got the one person of color, you got the one woman. Are they heard? What are they contributing? What have you done that maybe they had a position that was maybe contrary, and at the end the board decided to maybe listen to them, and how they really impacted the decision-making process.
Thank you, Sonya. I think, you both you and Meredith mentioned a theme of being a minority among the board. Have either of you had experiences where you're one of many of the same thought and mind on a board, and what's your experience with that been? So Meredith, I noticed a theme when there's a chair, a CEO who's a woman, and you're the only one, you want to make sure that you represent a woman there. Have you been on a board where the majority have been women? And has that experience been different than when you're the only one?
Except for the Women's Jewelry Association, which I was on briefly, and that was a trade organization. That's, I think, the only time I can remember being on a board that was mostly women. Yeah.
I'll add, I also was, sorry, Meredith.
I was just saying the dynamic was different for sure, yeah.
Yeah, I want to say the same. I was on 2 boards, Women in Defense board, the Michigan chapter, and also an organization called Inform, which is Michigan-based also, and is focused on women's leadership and development. I'll be honest, when I first got asked to be on Women in Defense board, and it was while I was in my last corporate role in Michigan, headquartered in Michigan, at a major Fortune 500 company. And, my first instinct was that I didn't want to be, and I had not been until that point, I had not been a member of Society of Women Engineers, SWE, or anything like that throughout my career. So the first time when I arrived in Michigan from LA, and the 6-7 years that I was there, they asked me almost immediately to be on the board of this Women in Defense. And my initial reaction was, I haven't been, and I don't know how I feel about being on a board of an organization that's just for women, because that just didn't seem that inclusive in itself to me at the time. But then I started to appreciate, and I will say that my boss helped expand my horizons, because he said, no, you will be on this board. And he was directed, you will be on this because you're this one woman, first one ever, leading large P&L and large group of people for development of combat vehicles at this corporation. And it was kind of historic in their 50-year existence, So he said, no, we expect you to also represent us in the community. And they've asked us, you need to consider this a little bit more thoughtfully, perhaps. So I was more thoughtful about it and decided that to see the light and join that board. Now, I'll tell you, it was one of the best experiences I had. We had some men, but it was majority women. And then after that, I got invited to be on the board of Inform. So during my 6-7 years, I was on these 2 boards, and they were both, again, as Meredith says, different experience. But I will tell you that having men also on that, it wasn't all women, right? It was majority women, but we had some men as well. And we reached out to CEOs and others who were males to come in and talk to us. So I think it's important in any case, if you're a majority, certainly the dynamic is different, but also to be mindful not to become too much of any one group, and to invite others to join.
Thank you, Sonya. Mike, I'm not going to ask you if you've been on a board with all white males before, but I know that you're really thoughtful about Leadership Rhode Island and the leadership journey that people who participate in Leadership Rhode Island is. You want to talk a little bit about how Leadership Rhode Island supports the leadership of Rhode Islanders.
Yeah, but I'll tie it into boards too, Angie.
Sure.
So I've been on a number of boards. In fact, the current one I chair is there are more women than men, and that's veteran suicide. So that may be surprising to some people. ALP, which is the Association of Leadership Programs. That's sort of the trade association for all of us on how to do the business. That's nearly all women. And then at the DoD level, when I served nationally, every chair in the country, every state chair in the country was an older white male, most of them generals. They called me the kid. So even though I'm a white guy, I was not the norm. I got picked on a lot. I also got opportunities because I stood out, taught them how to use Twitter and so forth. But anyhow, I think what Leadership Rhode Island does, or at least one component of Leadership Rhode Island, fits this conversation very well. And that is simply that when you really think about where good ideas come from, where solutions to problems come from, they come from places that are completely unpredictable. If we could predict innovation, well, we would all be innovators, but you can't predict it. And so you need to be exposed to different people of different industries, different sectors, different backgrounds, different races, mindsets, the whole dang thing. Because if you are, then you're going to get some new thought. So I see a lot of executive directors and I see board chairs choosing people to serve on their boards or pushing people onto their boards that have the same mindset or look like them or have the same expertise. And I tell you, you're just doing it for control. That's the only reason you're doing that. You think you know the right answers and you're trying to drive everybody to the answers that you have. I don't do that. I try to make a point to bring people that have very different mindsets, people that I know I can't control. They're going to bring something really different to the table because that's how I'm going to remove gaps of information. That's how I'm going to remove blind spots when we're trying to solve, at least in the nonprofit sector, the most complex problems in existence. This sector tackles the hardest problems there are. Problems, these social problems, things like this don't have easy solutions. So it really requires us to put together across that table people that are completely different from one another. I do like if people share similar values. I think that can be helpful, but not always. Sometimes even that gets in the way. So that's what Leadership Rhode Island does. When we bring these cohorts together through this application and selection process, when we're creating, as Angie called, the best class ever every year, we're really trying to strategically pull together a cast of incredible leaders that are in different parts of their leadership journeys, and they're coming from and representing different parts of our state. They have different backgrounds, they're different generations. We'll have someone that is really new in their leadership but have accomplished things at, say, 25 years old or a little bit older. And then we'll have retired folks that are 70 on the other side. And they're learning from each other. And through that learning and that exposure is where new ideas and new solutions and new approaches come. Diversity, I feel like so many times is looked upon as we're sort of handing something out to people that don't have a chance. Bullshit. What we're doing is we're grabbing assets and valuable people that are removing our gaps, our blind spots, and giving us good ideas. And we're making sure that we're engaging with society as a whole in order to do that. And at the nonprofit sector, you better, because this thing is hard. This is a hard sector. We're dealing with hard problems. So you've got to pull in all these different stakeholder groups to make that happen. If you don't have any board seats, or the board seats have stiff requirements on how much you've got to contribute and people can't live up to that, well, then create committees, create advisory councils, create other forums for which you can get the leaders that are going to broaden your perspective, and it's going to get you closer to the solution. And eventually they may become board members anyway. So I think there's lots of ways to do that. And then one of the things that I've learned at Leadership Rhode Island is, and I learned this from Donald King, who's a friend of mine. He's, those of you who know Black Repertory Theater, he's the founder of Black Rep, and he's an alum of Leadership Rhode Island. He taught me the importance of optics. So tokenism is nonsense, but optics matter. So if I really am trying to connect with a group of people, it is true, people tend to hang out with people that look like them. So if I want to get different communities, be it millennials or be it people of different races or cultures or whatever that case may be, if I'll take folks and give them visible roles where they lead, they have authority, and they're demonstrated as leaders, guess what? People feel like, oh, I could belong there. I could see myself there. Young people can get inspired. Oh, that could be me one day. Let me give that a try. So optics do matter. Tokenism is just silly, but putting, taking these sort of things and being deliberate about your optics to try to connect with those stakeholder groups that you think are most important to you, like Sonya was talking about the consumer, for example, that stuff matters, and making them visible in the process.
Can I jump in for a minute? I couldn't agree with you more, Mike. I think representation is extremely important. So many times when I've been the only one, I've been approached, or someone else has been told, like the chair of a board or a CEO or somebody, hey, because she's there, now I can see myself there. Because you can't be what you can't see. So that is so important. The second thing I really must also highlight what you said about nonprofits, that they solve the hardest problems. And that's why diversity is so important, and having these different ideas for innovation to solve these hard problems. Again, my own experience, absolutely, I agree with you. And I think it's amazing background for for-profit boards, because actually it's simpler on for-profit boards, and the motivations are better aligned and stuff, usually around profit. So I couldn't agree more that it's a great experience and it's a hard thing to do. And I want to offer a piece of data on that. We have amazing traction with nonprofits. For some reason, and it surprised us, to be honest with you, at the beginning, we didn't start out with targeting nonprofits. From the beginning, we had a discount for the price, kind of a structure in our pricing for nonprofits in case they came along, but that wasn't a target for us. And then when people heard about us, we have more just inbound inquiries, and we really enjoy working with them. We work with some big, youth care, International Youth Foundation, different kind of nonprofits, and it's just so enjoyable because they get it. They get how important it is, and they don't have enough resources a lot of times for obvious reasons. So we've been backwards to make it happen for them and give them the full turnkey solution and all that. But it's just a data point that shows you, the people that have not necessarily more resources, they have the least resources, they have to worry about it and all the process of just fundraising. And so they're very careful and deliberate where they spend, but they really want it, and they really realize, to your point, that it's important to have diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, I want to mention, in our alumni locally, out of 2,600, we've surveyed 95% serve on a board or a commission, right? So it's, at the real core and heart of what we do and what community leadership programming does is we, whether we use this term or not, some of you will identify with it, others say it's an archaic term, but this idea of servant leadership is really what we're trying to build here. And so it makes sense that our folks would be conditioned and attracted to board service. So we just did a national survey, and I suspect we'll have similar numbers all over the country, whereas people that want to know what the issues are and want to be invested in those issues want to serve their community, and board service is a nice way to do that.
Thank you. Oh, we're running up on time here. It was a really engaging conversation, and we didn't get to all our questions, but I think there was a thread through each one of your comments and statements that definitely responded to the impact of diversity of boards, what you look for in boards, and what you actually bring to the board as well. And I really liked what you talked a little bit about, Mike, in terms of the value nonprofits have and some of the work that they do in the community. And also really good nuggets of information about how LRI influences Rhode Island, without us really knowing. About 95% of boards actually having 90% of LRI graduates actually serving on boards. I think that's a remarkable data point. Does anybody have any final thoughts before the next panel's up? Thank
Can I say one thing, Angie?
Of course.
Hey, quit putting the same people on the boards. If folks are serving on like freaking 5 boards already, let's not put them on another one. Let's find some other way to do that. Let's go to that person and say, who do you think would do well on this board if for some reason that person has some cachet that you're looking for. But let's broaden this thing out, because it is ridiculous. And as an executive director and as the board chair, if you've got a board that's not that engaged, it's hard to do to keep people engaged even in their best case scenario. But how many different people can you really serve? I mean, really, these are high achieving leaders. If you're serving 5 different initiatives at the same time, what are you really doing? I happen to be good as a delegator, so I can get away with some of it. But even I fall short when I take on too much. And I know that happens constantly. So when you accept that next board assignment, because you're, Mr. Important so-and-so, but you're not at those meetings or you're sending your assistant or whatever, why are you really doing that? Because as an ED, you're killing us. You're making our lives really hard. We need engagement. These are tough problems, and we need good boards to focus.
And one thing, if I can take 30 seconds too, I love what Mike just said. And also, yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about measurement. I think measurement is very, very important. And, people often ask me, just because, we have very strong analytics, of course, and, we've predefined all these key performance indicators for diversity and inclusion, like 50 of them. But the point when they ask this, I always tell them that this is what I really want to leave everyone with, because if you don't measure it, it's not going to get better, right? I love that Meredith said they were, start just tracking, even by hand if you have to do it, right? But the thing that's important about measuring diversity and inclusion, and I speak about that not as a D&I professional, because I'm not that. I'm really a business professional, I guess. But I will say that to make it sustainable and to really know where you're doing the right things or not, you have to measure, and those measurements have to be driven by your business objectives. So, for example, if your strategy is focused on high growth, then the hiring pipeline KPIs may be the most important. If you're trying to get into new markets, that's your business strategy. Then it may be a different kind of thing. It's not necessarily you're looking at a different set of KPIs. So again, we have 50 of them defined already. So we're kind of agnostic about this. Nobody should measure all of them. But it's like, the first thing we say to everybody is, what's your business strategy? And I think that's the most effective way of making the business case, the case study for it too, is let's look at that, and let's look, how could we do that with, does diversity and inclusion help that business objective, whatever it is. And I bet you, I don't care if it's growing the top line, the bottom line, expanding markets, whatever it might be, your big business strategy, there's going to be an aspect that ties in with diversity and inclusion, and why that will make it better. Because there's just so many data, Deloitte, BCG, McKinsey, anybody, that says, everything gets better. And so you just have to know what that one thing is, not just do D&I and hope that'll show up in some good measures and then go searching for where it helped. But I would recommend picking one, your business strategy, link it with a diversity and inclusion objective, whether it's hiring or whatever it might be, and then watch it and see if it's improving or not. I'm sorry, but that's like a central thing. We didn't get to it, but it's really important to, and I'm happy to talk to anybody later about it. This has been a really engaging conversation. I want to thank you all for inviting me from the West Coast.